So good morning, colleagues and friends, and welcome to the session, How Holistic Approach Towards Climate Neutrality, Integrating Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation. My name is Giorgia Rambelli, and I'm the coordinator for the international dimension at the Office of the Covenant of Mayors Europe. And it will be my great pleasure to chair and moderate our discussion today. This event today is organized by the Covenant of Mayors Office in collaboration with the EU-funded project UrbanLEDS, which develops integrated low-emission resilient strategies in emerging economies. As you might have read on the news in the past weeks, a new research is showing that a child born in 2020 will have to endure an average of 30 extreme heat waves in their lifetime. This is 7 times more heat waves than someone born in 1960. Today's children will also grow up to experience twice as many droughts and wildfires and 3 times more river floods and crop failures than someone that was born in 1960s. It is clear that the dramatic effects of climate change will affect increasingly the daily life of communities across Europe and also across the world. And they will demand, of course, very effective and immediate solutions. Many of these prompt responses will have to be delivered at the local level, where communities are living. They are accessing a variety of services, including, for example, access to energy, but also to green spaces, affordable housing, and mobility. With these considerations as a backdrop, it becomes increasingly essential to consider holistic approaches and solutions that can encompass both ways to best mitigate and adapt to climate change. These actions really represent 2 sides of the same coin. Both are fundamental components of effective climate policy, and as such, they have become a very crucial part of the activities and the commitment the European Covenant of Mayors signatories have been undertaking, especially while developing their sustainable energy and climate action plans. So today we wish to discuss how cities in Europe are considering this integrated approach, not only how they are taking advantage of the co-benefits and the potential synergies between these 2 streams of action, for example, by reducing climate risk and at the same time carbon emissions. But we also want to dig into the conversation and try to discuss how they are trying to avoid lock-ins to counterproductive measures. So one example is investing in an energy infrastructure that might likely be damaged by extreme weather events. So we will touch upon not only what is being done, but also on the existing barriers that are still remaining. We will reflect upon how cities are organizing themselves within this framework. So looking into how administration and departments are cooperating to implement these actions effectively. And we will talk about how benefits and trade-offs are integrated and identified. We will look into how different climate groups can really come together to discuss and to avoid this silos thinking that could hinder the possibility of effective climate action. So our agenda today will be divided in 2 main parts. The first part is a panel discussion where we will have a number of expert and excellent speakers that will be joining us to share their insights and their experiences. And after that, we will have a moderated discussion where we will have the opportunity to engage you in our audience as much as possible to really pick your brains and to learn more about how you are seeing your cities tackling the challenges of the integration of these 2 types of measures, but also looking into what is being done on the ground and what kind of benefits they have brought about. So already from now, I would like to truly invite you to not only take part into the conversation and during our panel and asking your questions, posting them into chat, but especially during the discussion to please use the chat function to share your thoughts, your insight. We really look forward to hearing from you. So now I would like to take a minute to just introduce our excellent panel. So I'm joined today by Katharina Schulz, from TU Dortmund University. I'm joined by Oliver Moran. He's the chair of climate action at the committee deputy Lord Mayor for the city of Cork. I'm joined by Yanis Ikaniakis. He's from the Riga Energy Agency, by Ronald van Kampen from the city of Rotterdam, and then finally, last but not the least, by Evi Tsanakaki, an expert on urban sustainability of the Center for Renewable Energy Sources and Savings of Greece. So as you can hear, a great lineup of speakers that will take us through some of the insights and the experiences they have been undertaking in their respective cities and administrations in the past period. So to get us started, I would like our speakers to share a little bit of their thoughts, in particular about what they are doing on the ground. And I would like to begin with Katarina, who will share with us a little bit of her experiences and of her knowledge around how it is possible to mainstream cross-sectoral climate change adaptation in urban planning, and in particular, how can we foster these integrated approaches to have more resilient infrastructure. So without any further hesitation, Katarina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So is someone sharing my slides?
Yes, I think we have a slight delay, but it's nice to see you, Katarina. Maybe while we wait for your presentation to be shared, can I ask you a little bit, what is your expectation for today's discussion?
My expectation is that I think I'm a little bit, or I'm curious about the cities, how they integrate mitigation and adaptation, because I'm obviously not coming from a municipality. I'm working at the university. We're working together with municipalities, but I'm curious about speakers' experiences with the integrated approach. So.
I'm sure your curiosity will be satisfied, but your presentation seems ready, so yes, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for inviting me to the session. I'm actually at Malmö right now in my hotel room, so in case you see someone in the background, it's the housekeeping. I'm working at TU Dortmund University, and I'm currently part of the coordination team of the LIFE project Evolving Regions, from where I can contribute with some practical experience on today's topic. And I would like to give you some brief information about the project. Some of you might have already heard about it yesterday in the afternoon session when Bernd Decker from CINEA presented Evolving Regions as one example of a live project. So on the next slide, you see some brief information about the project. Yes. In Evolving Regions, there are 8 participating regions that will be enabled to develop and implement integrated and innovative solutions for the challenges of climate change adaptation. And they work together with 7 different partner institutions. So the project is funded by the EU LIFE program, and it is co-financed by the Environment Ministry of North Rhine-Westphalia, and it runs until March 2023. There are 7 regions from North Rhine-Westphalia participating in the project. You can see them at the slide in green. And 1 region in the Netherlands, which is represented by 2 municipalities, Zwarte Waterland and Kampen. And in total, the regions in North Rhine-Westphalia cover about 25% of the total area of the most populous federal state in Germany. However, Evolving Regions aims at climate adaptation at the regional level. The participating regions are rather rural areas with medium-sized and large centers, but they also compile of many small municipalities. So in total, I think we're working together with 100 municipalities. The North Rhine-Westphalian Environment Minister said that Evolving Regions is the flagship for climate change adaptation in rural areas for North Rhine-Westphalia. And the development of measures to be prepared for future events is the major effort, obviously. And Evolving Regions therefore provides a framework which allows taking new paths of cooperation, developing and discussing common on future, and using regional analysis for taking action. So the project itself covers a broad range of fields of action, such as adaptation activities and in agriculture, as well as forestry, green and blue infrastructure, etc. Because the framework, which is provided by the partner institutions, is flexible to the particular specific challenges of each region. Next slide, please. So when it comes to integrating climate change mitigation and adaptation, I really believe that this is a good approach, and I also think that it is important that the EU has raised the climate adaptation to the same level as climate change mitigation. This was reported yesterday in the morning opening with the European adaptation strategy. But I think in reality, there are some major challenges in the local implementation. And of course, I can only report from my experience of working with small municipalities in Germany. So perhaps it's different in other countries. So what I see is that climate change adaptation is a cross-sectoral task, which requires the involvement of different actors than mitigation. So there's a certain, you can call it community of responsibility for climate adaptation. For example, you have to involve stakeholders from health and safety, from disaster management, water management, agriculture, nature protection, businesses, house owners, of course, actors from the municipality, such as urban planning and many others. But when you look at the capacities in the municipalities, especially in small municipalities, they're very limited. So if municipalities are active in climate mitigation, then part of their capacity is already tied up with it. So they have to look, okay, what do we do? There are already networks from climate mitigation that exist that you can use, that our municipalities use in evolving regions, and that work well. But as I have already mentioned, they have to be further developed. And what is a very crucial point, I think, is that arguments for climate mitigation are much more stronger than for climate adaptation, because when it comes to climate mitigation, you can always say, okay, it saves money, it pays off quickly, it is immediately noticeable. You can measure the CO2 reduction more or less directly. And when it comes to climate change adaptation, it's combined, or it's a subject to uncertainties, because you don't know whether your municipality will be hit by the next extreme weather event or just the neighbor municipality. And at the next slide, some general remarks. Oh, I think I mixed it up. So just there's, I think, good climate mitigation is a basis for us to be able to adapt to the consequences of climate change at all. But because there are measures that create or use synergies and contribute to both mitigation and adaptation, for example, green infrastructure measures, but there are different targeted goals and measures of impact. There may be conflicting objectives. And also, the implementation obligations are different. So mitigation is a mandatory political task. That's what we experience in Germany and North Rhine-Westphalia. And climate adaptation works through other leverages, such as money, creating a livable future, sustainable infrastructure. There are, of course, security reasons and the reduction of risks. What we experience with the extreme rainfall and flood 3 months ago in Germany, there are some windows of opportunities at the moment which can be used, which is good. But yeah, there are some major challenges that have to yeah, come up with. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for sharing your perspective also as an academic and as researcher. So we already pinpointed some indeed essential issues and some essential challenges that we are facing. I think in particular what you were saying about alternative priorities, different objectives, and the fact that it's not always as easy to monetize the benefits of both of mitigation from one side and adaptation for another are certainly some of the things that we see very much as challenges. But now I would like to take a step back and to ask one of my colleagues from the Covenant of Mayors office to give us a little bit of an highlight on what the Covenant is doing in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and a little bit of a perspective also of why these integrated approaches are still something that should be considered as a way to go forward. So Arthur Inch is going to give us this short presentation and introduction and overview. Arthur, while we wait for your presentation to be loaded, can I ask you a little bit what is your expectation from the discussion today?
Yeah, thank you, Georgia. I look very much forward to the discussion. I mean, the topic of integration, mitigation, and adaptation is something that is very much near and dear to the heart of the Covenant of Mayors, I suppose. I suppose we will have very detailed examples how these interactions can be identified, the benefits, synergies, trade-offs. Yeah, I'm expecting a very in-depth, practical discussion on this topic.
Thank you very much. And the presentation seems ready, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgia. Yes, hello, everyone. Indeed, just connecting to what Katarina just said, I mean, she already introduced sort of general concept between integrating mitigation and adaptation. And we've already seen sort of a few things to consider here. And just taking us a step back, perhaps, and talking about how the Covenant of Mayors is looking at all of this. So as Georgia said, my name is Arthur Hinch. I work for the Covenant of Mayors office and would like to frame a little bit, the topic of integrating mitigation and adaptation in the Covenant of Mayors framework and in CCAPs in particular. So next slide, please. I think there's a little bit of a delay. Okay. So the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, just for anyone who might not be aware, is brings together thousands of local governments all over Europe committed to achieving the EU's climate and energy targets, and specifically to climate neutrality towards 2050. Local governments who are signatories of the Covenant of Mayors, they commit towards climate neutrality and towards greenhouse gas reduction. They engage their stakeholders in their respective constituency. They act and they monitor on progress on climate change, and of course engage in capacity building activities and networking with their peers. Next slide. So the Covenant of Mayors has three main objectives, one of them being accelerating decarbonization, improving climate resilience, and a third pillar specifically dedicated to alleviating energy poverty. As I already mentioned, all of this is geared towards achieving net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. And this is the overarching sort of framework where all of this takes place. Next slide. So an integrated approach is very much at the heart to what the Covenant of Mayors does and what the signatories of the Covenant of Mayors do. I mean, many signatories have CCAPs, some CAPs, some signatories have already CCAPs or are working on their CCAPs. And obviously a CCAP, so a Sustainable Energy Climate Action Plan, calls for an integrated approach between climate change mitigation and adaptation. I think everyone here in the call is very much familiar with these two concepts. It is, of course, very much to be noted, what Georgia said at the beginning already, that there is great value when thinking of these two streams in an integrated manner, both from a governance perspective, so cross-departmental cooperation, but also from a technical perspective. How do we exploit synergies between these two approaches, from a cost perspective, from a environmental perspective, and also from an avoidance of lock-ins and malinvestments. So both climate mitigation and adaptation are very much the core of the overall Covenant of Mayors framework and the CCAP plan creation process. And even the GRC guidelines for CCAPs, which is one of the guidelines that explain how a CCAP can be written, is very clear about that it's very useful for cities to identify these synergies or trade-offs at the very early stage to be prepared for more effective integrated climate action. Next slide. Very quickly, I'm assuming most of you will be aware, but just to reiterate, the Covenant of Mayors framework looks at signatories creating a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, engaging in target setting, creating a risk and vulnerability assessment regarding climate change adaptation specifically, and engaging in monitoring and implementing their climate action in the long run. So that's the overarching framework. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate briefly that's one too far. Yes, thank you. This is quickly the overarching framework of a CCAP process. So first, a city would join the Covenant of Mayors and becomes a signatory, would create a baseline review and create an emissions inventory, then submit the CCAP and implements the actions and monitors and reports on the progress every 2 years. Submits the monitoring report, has an evaluation and feedback process, and ensures that there is an adequate monitoring cycle ongoing for this integrated plan. Keeping in mind, obviously, that it's always talking about integration and mitigation within the framework of the same plan and being integrated into greater urban sustainability. Next slide. Just very quickly here, I mean, the Covenant of Mayors has certain guidelines, of course, in place and reporting templates that cities and signatories can use to report their progress with regards to climate change mitigation and adaptation. These are regularly updated, and there is space there for reporting on both mitigation and adaptation, also highlighting the interactivity between both these streams. So the interactive part and the holistic part, as Georgia mentioned at the very beginning, is really the core of what the Covenant does. Next slide. And just to quickly reiterate that, obviously, like when we talk about integration, mitigation, and adaptation, there's the creation of the CCAP, of the Energy and Climate Action Plan. And then there is also the general process of integrating these plans into urban sustainable development, and to consider how sort of climate policies relate to other urban development areas. And here there is an interesting methodology developed by ICLE called the GCC, Green Climate Cities Planning Cycle, which is actually supports cities also in looking at both mitigation and adaptation in an integrated manner and facilitating a connection between these two streams and really making sure that any climate plan is integrated in broader urban development. So that's just as a quick FYI. Next slide. Summary and key takeaways. So what I said, it's an integrated climate actions at the core of the Covenant of Mayors. That's why we're organizing this session, and that's why we're very keen on having these in-depth discussions today, and here are these concrete examples. Climate ambition by 2030 and 2050 should be reflected in ambitious climate actions for both mitigation and adaptation. And what we see all over the Covenant of Mayors, that this is happening on a drastic scale. And what we will see through our esteemed panel today is that the integration of mitigation and adaptation actions has the potential to unlock new innovative projects. So there's many reasons why cities should and are already doing this, and I very much look forward to the panel today. Georgia, back to you.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for underpinning a little bit what is the thinking of the Covenant of Mayors approach and showing how it is integrated even in the structure, in the frameworks of the development of a joint sustainable energy and climate action plan. I think this provides us with a few elements also to consider what are the key steps that need to be undertaken in order to have a successful climate plan, and also for reflecting a little bit on where the potential stands when it comes of integrating these type of measures within the overarching urban sustainability strategy of a city. But speaking of cities that are doing their best and are doing a great job actually at integrating their action when it comes to climate adaptation and climate mitigation, is now my pleasure to give the floor to Oliver Moran. I mentioned before the Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Cork, who has a lot to share about how to bring together different departments and different parts of the city, I believe, in discussing in a more coherent and cohesive manner climate change adaptation and mitigation. So Oliver, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Yes, my name is Oliver Moran, and thank you to the organisers of today's session for the very kind invitation to speak. And as Georgia said, I'm deputising today for the Lord Mayor of Cork here in Ireland. I'm chair of the Climate Action Committee of Cork City Council, where I was elected as a Green Party councillor in 2019. So Cork is the largest city in the Republic of Ireland after Dublin. The city itself has a population of 210,000 people, and over 300,000 people live in the immediate metropolitan area. Cork is ambitious and a daring city in the Irish context. Cork and Cork people have a reputation for being confident and bold. And in 2019, Cork City Council, like many other cities across the globe, declared a climate and biodiversity emergency. It was the same year, Georgia, that Greta Thunberg said that she wants us to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. The declaration of the climate emergency in Cork coincided with a new council term, and it was the first act of the newly elected council. It was declared by the Lord Mayor, speaking from the chair at the first meeting of that council, and speaking for all of council at the outset of that new term. And it coincided with a very palpable shift in consciousness around the climate action, the presence of climate strikers outside of City Hall, and a political shift in the election that was marked by a very clear green wave. And that declaration recognised the global, the national, and the local dimensions of the climate emergency. And that in declaring an emergency, we had a position in the world and a responsibility towards it. And it noted the integrated economic, societal, and environmental threats posed by climate change and biodiversity loss. And importantly, it set out an immediate agenda for change in posture for Cork to begin addressing it. By doing so, it put in place an overarching context for the work of the new council. The most immediate reflection of that was a change in posture, was a change in the governance structure of the city. And these positioned climate as a top priority in actions across the organisation. The Climate Action Committee that I chair was the most publicly visible of those immediate changes. Cork City Council is unique in Ireland in not only being the first to establish the Climate Action Committee as part of the declaration we made, but significantly, this new committee and climate action itself is not pigeonholed within the environment section of city business. Climate action in Cork City Council is mainstreamed. It is as relevant to housing as it is to economics, as it is to planning, as it is to transport, as it is to social inclusion. No one department or directorate is responsible for delivering climate action. Everyone is responsible. And that means, because that's what it means to be in an emergency. The committee is responsible for overseeing a whole of city response to the climate emergency. One of the most striking aspects of the governance structure is that the committee itself isn't served by a regular directorate like other committees. It's served by the corporate affairs directorate, which has responsibility for a whole of organisation view. And there is, of course, a dedicated policy climate action unit provided by the Strategic and Economic Development Directorate, but projects are overseen by a cross-functional climate action team. And if your house is on fire, everyone responds to putting it out, to adapt, and to mitigate. And these structures that we put in place reflect that. That change of footing since the declaration of emergency is visible across the organisation in examples like a new flood early warning system, a new intelligent transport system policy, a new public lighting strategy. And we have begun data collection rating the energy efficiency of so far over 70% of our housing stock. We have put in place the largest electric vehicle fleet of any local authority in Ireland. In Cork, every city vehicle that can be electric is electric, and that's saving 270 tonnes of CO2 every year. And it's that kind of daring that is welcomed in the context of an emergency. It's the scale that we need to be thinking of. It's the sort of cross-sectoral impact that shows an all-hands approach to an emergency. And it has allowed us also to recognise and challenge concepts given to us by stakeholders and by central government, and to look beyond them towards the real goal. One of the smallest, most precise examples of that is how we have renamed an obligation given to us by central government. So every local authority in Ireland is obliged to establish a decarbonisation zone within its boundary area. Cork City has consciously renamed this its pilot decarbonisation zone, recognising that meeting these national goals are not check-the-box exercises. Everywhere will need to be a decarbonisation zone. So this is just the pilot. And that shift in consciousness represents the kind of step change necessary to recognise that our house is on fire and that is not fine. This year, Greta Thunberg has scolded us with taunts now of blah, 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 and she's right. All too often, declarations like this are about patting ourselves on the back and speaking the words that people expect us to speak. But who deserves a pat on the back for saying that their house is on fire? What matters is how we have changed to respond to the fact that our house is on fire. And have we done enough? No, our house is still on fire. But on Cork, we have followed through the declaring of emergency with a change in posture. And we have made genuine and conscious steps to recognise the circumstances that we're in, reflected in how we have changed our footing, how we have recognized across the organization the situation that we're in, and how everyone is responsible for responding at once. Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you so much for sharing with us your perspective and your experience. I mean, beyond just sharing this committee structure that you have been able to set up within your city, which is remarkably interesting, and I'm sure it will bring forward a lot of discussion later, also for reminding us of the importance of all at a level of government, of course, that they have to play within this type of challenges, but in particular of our community. So if we are trying to find solutions that are immediate and prompt to what you just called a climate emergency, and I think we can all agree that we are living this right now, especially on the way to COP, it's particularly important to remind ourselves that ultimately that's what we are working for, and this is why we need to design impactful action. And definitely this type of mitigation adaptation synergies can also help us to deliver on that. So thank you very much, Oliver. I would now like to give the floor to our next speaker. Yanis Ikamiekis is the director of the Riga Energy Agency, and he will tell us a little bit more about how the integration of climate change mitigation adaptation is happening in Riga's Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan to really support a process towards climate neutrality. So the floor is yours, Yanis.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here, and I will try to explain what Riga is doing in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation. So, but first of all, I would like to express a little bit of history in Riga. So we were the first municipality in Latvia to sign Covenant of Mayors Pact, and also in 2010 we developed Sustainable Energy and Action Plan. However, in 2014 we updated it with smart city solutions and integrated measures how we will move forward. And now in 2021, we are developing Riga's Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. And thank you to Arturs, which perfectly described what we are also doing now. And I think the main difference is that we are not looking only on energy. We're looking with air pollution. We're looking with adaptation measures. We have some floods when there's high rainfall, and we're also trying to look forward in next maybe 3 years when we also would like to adapt our action plan with the integrated measures for waste management and also for absorption of the CO2 in the city. But this is where we also only now we try to develop the methodology. So this is not included yet in the baseline, but in this plan we make first steps how we will move forward in this direction to cover all the fields. So, but I think that from our side, the biggest difference has been the change in the Riga City Council in 2020, where now our City Council very much acknowledges the climate change and really takes steps forward to make actions. And now, actually, as Riga Energy Agency, this is our task now to how we will implement these measures and how we will implement this action plan. So, but we are very glad that also our city mayor has said that the goal for Riga is to become first climate neutral city in Baltic states and become among 100 cities in Europe. So, and this is huge for us. And we are planning how we will do this. But I think one of the main actions which have already been done is that we have developed Climate Neutrality Commission within our City Council, which is overseeing also development of Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan, and also will be looking and monitoring the plan, where also some politicians are included, where also workers from departments are included, and that we really can implement these actions not only on the paper but in real life. But when we look on the city baseline, we see that our biggest challenges and also emissions come from housing sector and also from the transport. And industry. And so this I think will be a challenge for whole Europe. But now we are looking forward how we can reduce this energy consumption and also emissions. But I think what is very crucial for us that we have separated municipality infrastructure and equipment. So there we include also street lighting and all the infrastructure where Riga city pays for the energy itself. So this is not maybe a very big part of the city if we compare with all the city, but this is important for us, and why I will explain a little bit later. And as I told, that our biggest challenge is transport sector, which takes about 44% of the total emissions, as a lot of cars still use diesel and other fuel sources, fossil fuel sources, and now we are planning how we will reduce them, starting from rapid increase of the infrastructure for the cyclists, and also that the city is more welcomes people who try to use micromobility solutions. And also we're looking forward to the low emission zones, and this is all the measures which are happening already now. And another challenge is housing sector. So we still need to refurbish about 6,000 buildings. And from the one point of view, of course, it's very important to reduce energy consumption and to reduce CO2 emissions. But also for us, it is important that this building stock is outdated. It's quite old, and we need to act now, not only because of the climate, but also because of the building. The buildings are in poor technical condition. And I think the third most important challenge for us is moving forward to zero emission technologies in heat supply. So in Riga city, about 70% of the residential buildings are connected to the district heating, and the district heating operates and that everybody has the possibility to connect. The heat is purchased from the boiler houses or cogeneration plants, and now we have 30% of the renewables, but most of them is produced from biomass, and 70% are produced from natural gas. But the goal is to move forward to zero emissions. So, and I think this will be the biggest challenge. But if you look on our targets, so the target to 2030 comparing with 2019 is to reduce total emissions by 25%. If we look, if we use the baseline 1990, so we have reduced our emissions about 50 to 55%, because of the industry collapsed in beginning of the 90s, but we will not stop on that. So we use our baseline 2019, and we would like to reduce the emissions for 25%. But most important is that we would like to achieve neutrality in Riga City Council infrastructure by 2030. And most of these solutions are, of course, to reduce energy consumption and also to implement renewables as prosumers and also energy communities. And we have a huge potential on energy management issues, but also some innovative solutions. What we would like to use is to switch transport, which is used in Riga City Council, to car sharing. That we do not have to buy our own cars, but we can use cars which are shared by these companies, and after the working hours are ends, then this company can use this car for their services for other residents. So, and this do not cost a lot of money for Riga City Council, but this would be a good solution. And also some of the CO2 emissions by 2030, we see that we will also have to offset. But this is very important that the Riga City Council thinks about that. So that's all from my side. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Yanis, for sharing the vision that Riga has in implementing their climate neutrality target. I think it's fascinating to see how many measures are there and how many different components and actions you can implement and you need to implement to really bring forward a cohesive strategy to reach this objective. I also want to thank you for underlining something that, of course, should always be at the back of our head when we are discussing about resilience. It's not just about the environment, but you mentioned how you want to engage citizens in becoming prosumers. So expanding this possibility of also having a more democratized approach to energy production, but also what you mentioned around the energy efficiency first pillar. It comes together, of course, with also a notion that it's also part of the Covenant of Mayors, of course, of ensuring access to energy and in particular to tackle issues such as energy poverty, which are also closely related to the building sector that you have listed as one of your priority areas. So I think this is very interesting, and thank you very much for your contribution. Now, I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. It's my pleasure to give the floor to Ronald van Kampen. He's the manager of a pumping system for the city of Rotterdam. So we go into something very practical, and we'll learn a little bit more about how it is possible to decrease the footprint, the carbon footprint of water management, while also increasing adaptation to climate change. Ronald, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for introducing me, Georgia. First, I want to thank EURESFO for organizing this event. Cooperation on a worldwide scale is very important for taking measures against a changing climate. Well, as you said, I'm the manager of the pumping stations for the city of Rotterdam. My goal is to prevent the city from flooding by heavy rainfall and that the citizens can flush the toilets. Well, by the way, I will use this PowerPoint presentation for the simple reason that written words make a better long-lasting impression than my face. So, well, this statement is presented in two parts. First, I will discuss the measures taken to reduce the energy consumption in pumping stations. And in the second part, I will discuss the measures against the changing climate. The city of Rotterdam has a vast network of pumping stations to process all sewage and rainwater. Every year, we transport over 100 million cubic meters of rain and sewage water to our water treatment plants, where we filtrate and purify this water. This amount of water is enough to fill over 40,000 Olympic pools. The electric energy required to pump all this water through our sewer system was in 2020 11 million kilowatt hour. This amount of energy can maintain more than 3,000 houses every year. I started this program in 2010 to reduce the amount of required energy. Eventually, this program resulted in a reduction of 30% of energy consumption. So how does this program work? Well, throughout the statement, I will show you how I took measures to vastly reduce the energy consumption required for our pumping process. Well, in 2010, I started to replace the regular electrical motors in our pumps with high efficiency motors. The efficiency returns on this replacement are portrayed in the IEC 634 and are regularly adjusted and improved. By this measure alone, I saw a reduction of energy consumption by 15%. The motors of the pumps are powered by what we called frequency converters. The frequency converters we use are of intelligent design. Clock pumps have a higher energy consumption. So when the converters detect contamination, they start a washing program which soaks and disembeds any waste or filth out of the pumps. Through this program, the pumps are always clean and thus use less energy and a maximum energy efficiency. In addition, the frequency converters will maintain the pumps at the best efficiency point, resulting in the highest energy consumption return possible. In addition to the frequency converters, all pump stations with a roof are fitted with solar panels. The generated energy from these panels is used for lighting, ventilation, heating, and switch boxes. Unused energy from the panels is used to power the grid. The total yield of the solar panels is over 1 million kilowatt hour per year. Please, next slide. I can't see the next slide. Rebecca?
Looks like there is a connection problem, unfortunately. So I would like to ask you, Ronald, would you prefer to go on with your presentation, although we don't have the possibility to see, and then maybe we can show the slides back, or is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's okay with me, right?
Perfect, okay. We'll try to fix it in the meantime. Apologies.
Right, thank you. Well, the pumps and motors all have sensors that measure the condition. When a certain threshold is met, the control room will receive a signal from these sensors. This allows our staff to quickly intervene in the pump or motor. This will prevent a pump or motor to run in a suboptimal state, which could result in more energy consumption. There's the slide. All right, thank you. Well, it's important to note that this reduction is gradual, not instant. Do not expect to see this amount of return from the measures within the single year. Although these measures require a substantial financial investment, the returns are certainly worth the effort. Thus, does it only repay its value in the coming years? It also reduces the carbon footprint. In this case, it's reduced to a remarkable 1,000 tons of CO2 every year. Well, in the second part, I will discuss the measurements taken to adapt to the climate change. The city of Rotterdam is a delta city vulnerable for rising sea and river levels and heavy rainfall. If we don't adapt the city against the changing climate, we will lose the city by the water. First, I will start with the water square. Well, a water square focuses on the optimum use of the available budget for solving the water issue. In all its aspects, it anticipates a future in which technical and spatial disciplines will more often be interwoven with a single innovative design. For example, the Bandon Square has a capacity of 1.7 million liters of rainwater and is therefore the largest water square in the world. And if not filled, people can sport, teach, read, or go even to a theater on this square. Second, we use underground storage basins. An underground storage basin is used to relieve the sewer system during heavy rainfall. By a certain level in the sewer system, valves will be opened and redirect water to the basin. After a while, when the rain is stopped, the water will be pumped back to the sewer system. Third and last, I can mention green roofs. The citizens of Rotterdam and housing corporations are encouraged by public grants to install green roofs. These green roofs can contain rainwater. It is also an important contribution to the biodiversity. At this moment, there are nearly 400 square kilometers of green roofs in the city of Rotterdam. Also, there are a lot of small programs to reduce the impact of heavy rainfall. Please take a visit to our website mentioned in the presentation to see them all. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope this will be a contribution to other cities for the battle against the changing climate. To you, Georgia.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for sharing all of this, the very practical examples of how measures can be combined, and also for being very resilient yourself when the presentation went off and continuing your introduction. So thank you very much for that as well. And we will have, of course, opportunities to continue the conversation and to talk about, and here I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate, not only what has worked really well, but also I would like to hear a little bit more of what you would not recommend others to do. But let's park that for our discussion later today. And now I give the floor to our last speaker of this panel, Evie Tsanakaki. She's an expert on urban sustainability, as I mentioned before, the Center for Renewable Energy Sources and Savings. And CRES has been a national coordinator for the Covenant of Mayors for a very long time. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Evie. And I understand that you will be sharing with us some experiences around this interaction between wildfires that unfortunately have been proven to be particularly dangerous this year, and wind farms. So Evie, the floor is yours.
Yes, I decided to use this as my main question, trying to highlight really what is the challenge today in Greece with respect to combining adaptation and mitigation, and how we stand at the moment. So next slide, please. It's the thing is, waiting for the next slide. The thing is that we have a lot of plans. We have a national level, and we have a climate plans and several sectoral plans. We have adaptation plans at regional level, and at local level, we have some plans that are institutionalized, which are just sustainable mobility plans. We don't have the institutionalized the SEAPs or the SECAPs. These are voluntary, as you all know, but we do have a lot of municipalities with sustainable energy action plans trying to implement, and now we have signatories to the new covenant, which we still say the new covenant because it has the adaptation part, and we have also several plans, the SECAPs, that combine mitigation and adaptation measures. And recently, we have a new strategy that has been decided that will be a new holistic approach that has to do with climate change and civil protection to mobilize the entire state resources. Next, please. And meanwhile, we have a lot of responsibilities. Just this is just to show you the people responsible for the National Energy and Climate Plan. Even more responsibilities for the adaptation plans at regional level, and even more responsibilities when it comes to local level and various departments. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, we are facing many disasters. Apart from the horrible wildfires that we had this year, we've had the floodings, we've had the extreme snowfall and the destructions. We've had a severe, a couple of years ago, we had a terrible death toll from the Mati wildfires. And when we talk about wildfires, they're all also in a lot of urban regions, a lot of housing developments have been threatened. We've had serious disasters. And then we've had the question of, do wind farms, do wind turbines cause fires? And it was strange that even the Prime Minister, in talking about these wildfires, had to say, well, no, it's not the wind farms that are causing these wildfires, because there was there was a conspiracy theory, but it was not really a conspiracy theory because it was really local people saying that the investors of the wildfires, of the wind turbines, were igniting the fires. So even though we're in the middle of the crisis, of climate crisis, even people understand climate change is happening, we still have a debate about if wind farms are a risk. And what is mostly strange was that the license for wind farms was evoked for Evia after the wildfires. Of course, this doesn't mean that maybe this investment is cancelled forever, but still, we see now that we're facing several conflicts that go really beyond understanding climate change and climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So it's becoming more of a threat situation where people are being terrified. We have conspiracy theories like the COVID situation. And one way that at governmental level they tried to cope with that is that they had a new ministry, but this, which was for climate change and civil protection since September. So at national level, it seems that we're trying really to cope with a threat that is too large for us to handle. Next, please. So where are we heading at the moment, and does this have to do with the local level? I would just like to see, to quote some of the things that the new Minister for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection, Mr. Christos Stylianidis, who was a former European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. So you see, we're shifting now from mitigation to crisis to emergency situations. But still, apart from saying that climate change is well ahead of us and we need to act now and time is of the essence, which we know, still there's reference on the mitigation topics like the Paris Agreement, the European Green Deal, and combined with enforcing civil protection mechanisms and understanding that tackling climate change is a marathon and a sprint at the same time. So what he says is that we need to enhance the mechanisms already available and develop new approaches. And the thing is, yes, we do have mechanisms, we do have experience. So what really are the challenges is that on a scientific level, on a discussion level, when presenting the regional adaptation plans, when talking about plans, talking about climate change and climate crisis and climate action seems a uniform discussion. We talk about the same things. And when you hear experts, they talk about mitigation, adaptation, integrated, complementary, SDGs, integrated approaches, security of supply, security against disasters. And also we know about integrated urban solutions. We have bioclimatic design and greening of urban spaces. We have nature-based solutions. We have cities that have developed very smart communication systems, including, for instance, applications to deal with extreme heat waves that we've had in Greece, in Athens, in Thessaloniki. We've been talking about multi-level stakeholder engagement, which is it's happening at the city level, but still we need to be more sustainable and resilient. But when it comes to understanding, changing ways and cooperating among departments, still I think we're at all. We have conflict, contradiction, despair. I would an example of the municipality of Farsala. We were together in a sustainable a climate project. They said that they needed to suspend all their activities in the climate action project due to dealing with the situation, emergency and disaster caused by floods. So we still hope that we can use the local level, because there things are resolved in a time and place responsive manner rather than running and sprinting and marathon. So we still need to adapt to new fears, new threats, new conflicts, and to a permanent state of emergency, which it still seems that we're terrified. Next slide, please, to conclude. What, on the one hand, we're talking at municipal level. On the other hand, we're still not, we have not reached the consensus. Can you go to the next slide, please? We need to support, we need more, we need, I would say, more discussion. Just to show you, on the one hand, the discussions that among stakeholders, internal municipality departments talking to each other, different responsibilities, etc. And on the other hand, a very inspiring picture of the Agis Emanuel. He's an actor and a marathon runner, and he's in the 70th first day of his run to Glasgow from Athens for the COP, and trying to raise awareness on the issue of climate change, climate emergency. I would just like to conclude by saying that there's so many local level cooperations and local level strategies that complement each other, but I think our new threat is the social unrest that is caused by all these threats, the climate threats.
Thank you very much, Evie, for also giving us a bit of a reality check. I think indeed the discussion around the preparedness and this continuous state of emergency that we will increasingly be finding ourselves in, it's definitely something that was worth putting in as a backdrop to our discussion. I also want to underline that this idea of having a lot of plans is absolutely true, and unfortunately very often some of these plans are not aligning with one another. So we have substantial gaps. It's not just within the administrations that there is not an optimal, let's say, coordination all the time. I think also across level of government, still in Europe, but probably actually surely in other parts of the world as well, there is still a long way to go to have a proper alignment of our resources as well as of our capacity to really tackle such macro challenges as the one that we are facing. So definitely good to keep the price, but also what is the opposite of a prize in mind when we are having this conversation. And again, towards Glasgow, I think this is an important reflection to have. So now we would like to have a little bit of a discussion, not only among ourselves, but also including the colleagues and the friends that are joining us online as attendees. So I know the opportunity for you has now come to really share your thoughts and to continue bringing forward your ideas and things that are happening in your own city. So I would just to note that there has been a few input coming from Fraser, and he's mentioning how the work in Queensland is taking similar shapes to what we were presenting and discussing earlier. Fraser was mentioning that they have been developing a regional resilience strategy between various levels of government in the area, all formulated around, for example, a commonality. In some cases, he was mentioning it's a river basin, but looking into really how other parts of the world are also tackling the challenge of integrating mitigation adaptation. So Fraser, please continue sharing your thoughts, and everyone else on the line, please do the same. I would now like to ask Arthur to take back the floor to tell us a little bit how the exercise that we are planning to do will look like.
Georgia. So yes, this is indeed the interactive part of the and we would very much well, we would like to from
I can't hear you, Arthur.
Having some challenges with your
so I turned off my camera. Is the is it better now?
Better, yes.
All right, fine. So indeed, let me start over. So this is the second part of the event. We would like to focus a bit more on the discussion part, actually, and we'd like to hear more from our panelists, but also from you in the chat. What do you think regarding the integration of mitigation and adaptation? What did you think of some of the examples suggested during the meeting? But also would like to hear from your particular experiences. So we have three key questions which are very much at the core of when we talk about integration, mitigation, and adaptation. The way this will work is that we'll have a bit of a discussion, and here in the mural, we will take live notes. just as a little bit of a visual representation, which is something that's very nice that we can do. So 3 questions. First of all, what examples of benefits and trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation can you think of, or do you have experience with? Very broad question. The second one would be, would you say that in your city, currently has a integrated approach to integrating climate change policies across departments, perhaps paying additional attention to the use of the word integrated? And the third question, we've heard already from Oliver regarding the climate emergency. I mean, that many cities around the world really are declaring climate emergency. And one of the aspects of declaring climate emergency is that it calls for more cooperation between departments to sort of see municipal decisions within the overarching framework of climate change and the climate emergency. So the question would be, has your city declared climate emergency? If so, would you say that this has contributed to more integrated action and more cross-departmental cooperation? So Georgia, I think I'll hand over to you, right?
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to try to trigger some discussion with our panelists, and I would also ask my colleague, also from the government office.
Georgia, we can't hear you either. Sorry.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I guess you have to switch. Yeah.
Let's try it like this. Hopefully better. I don't know what's going on here. Arthur and I are based in 2 different cities and countries, so it's interesting that this is happening at the same time. Anyway, I will ask my colleague Silvia Salini from the Covenant of Mayors office as well to please also help us keeping track of the discussion on the chat at the same time. So while we are waiting for the contribution from our audience, maybe I would like to put forward the first question and potentially start with the benefits side of what you have been experiencing in your own city or in your own, let's say, research. And maybe I can start with Katarina. She already gave us a quick overview of the challenges that are still remaining, but also of why it is important to be ambitious and trying to bring together mitigation and adaptation. So maybe Katarina, starting from your side, what would you say the key benefits that you have encountered in your research are when it comes to integrate mitigation and adaptation? Any examples that you can share with us?
I have a bit of a connection problem, but I think I understand understood your question. We are working more on the network level and how to bring together people from the different sectors. So what I also said in my presentation is that there are often very good network structures from mitigation that you can use to integrate adaptation, or that you can like work on and further develop to use them for adaptation. So I think this is a good benefit, because often you have good networks in smaller municipalities because they are very they are already very active in mitigation, so this could be a good benefit. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I would like to ask the same question to the other panelists. Oliver, maybe starting from your side. You have been doing this now for a while. Is there any immediate benefit that you see and that you would like to underline for other cities that might be considering, for example, your approach to setting up such a committee like the one that you are having?
Yeah, it was interesting actually listening to Katrina speaking, because and perhaps I just want to clarify the vocabulary. Like by mitigation, Katrina, you mean the same as I do, that we're talking about reducing CO2 emissions, and by adaptation you mean taking actions to, I suppose, reduce the effects of climate change. Am I right in that?
Yeah.
Because certainly from my experience in Cork, and maybe we're a little unique in the world then, that I found that adaptations, it seems to be easier, because I mean, something we're affected by in Cork is flooding, and there's a very clear demand from members of the public, to want to prevent flooding and to protect their homes and their businesses from flooding, for example, and other examples of extreme weather. Whereas mitigation, we found that it has, it requires a change to economy and society much greater than adaptation. Adaptation is responding to something, but society and economy as it currently exists just goes on. Whereas for us, at least, the mitigation aspect and the changes that go along with that are more difficult. Whether it is shifting from private car use to more public transport and more active travel, and putting in infrastructure that goes along with that, or whether it is retrofitting homes, changing to green electricity, green energy. They seem to be the more challenging aspects for us because they involve changes to the way we do things currently. Whereas mitigation seems to be easier because it's just responding to what's there and protecting what's there currently.
Thank you. My camera again, let me know if it's not working properly. I think it's easier to do most often is the fact that it's more difficult to monetize to a certain extent the benefits of adaptation and even the access to, for example, revenues or investment to implement adaptation measures seem to be a little bit more difficult to obtain than mitigation. So I don't know, maybe just putting it out there as a statement. I would like to hear also from others. What is your experience? Is it easier to self-measure as mitigation, adaptation, and what is your experience in terms of the benefits that you've been facing in trying to integrate both?
Is it just me?
Yes, sorry, Georgia. It's hard to hear you, but I think that I heard that you asked everybody else to share experience, and maybe I can describe something from our side, from Riga, Latvia. So first of all, I think that it's from our side, from our experience, it's very hard to actually implement adaptation measures together with mitigation, because in previous years we always were looking only on energy sector, on mitigation measures, how to reduce CO2 emissions. And now the challenge is to integrate these solutions together, as they are goes hand in hand. And for example, one of the example are like green zones, green territories. If we plant more trees or have them more, the flooding is a little bit less when there's high rainfall, when there's high rainwater coming, and therefore there's not so much energy consumption in the wastewater treatment plant, and also these trees or green zones absorb more CO2 emissions, and we have to think them. Like also the topic of today's session is holistically, and but it is quite a challenge to look on these things together. So that's maybe from our side shortly. But we try to look on these things together with adaptation, how they go hand in hand. So yeah, thank you.
Yanis, I'm trying one more time. I don't know if you can hear me, but otherwise I will give the floor to colleague Arthur.
Thank you, Georgia. I can barely hear you, but I'm guessing you're giving me the floor. Let me know in case you can't hear me either. But yes, just perhaps staying on the first question quickly, going from benefits of integration, mitigation, adaptation to sort of the trade-offs, or even like potential, considerations around malinvestment, or these things. I know of a few examples really, and perhaps I would direct this question to you, Ronald. I know that in Rotterdam, of course, there was some consideration around the installation of, I think, electric car charging stations in areas that were prone to flooding. So obviously that is might have been defined as a potential malinvestment, because potentially there is implications for that infrastructure due to climate change, and also other cases, of course, where you use more air conditioning in houses, for instance, to adapt to increase in temperatures during the summer, but that increases emissions. So these kind of trade-offs are there. Perhaps, can you elaborate a little bit on these examples from your experience on how do you identify trade-offs? How do you deal with that?
Well, there's a program called the Rotterdam's Weerworld that I mentioned in my presentation, and we try to collaborate with the citizens, with the industries, with political people for to take actions in adapt to the climate. So we try to collect rain in tons. We try to give them information about to take the bricks out of the street and put their plants in. So it's a broad program, and don't forget the Dutch are used to battle against the water. It's a battle from for years. For example, we have also a trade-off with Jakarta. This city is flooding on a regular basis by heavy rainfall. As knowledge holder, we discussed the measurements taken against the changing climate with the city, so that we are less vulnerable, that they're less vulnerable in the future. We also helps other cities for battle against the changing climate, and that's because we are called a powerhouse of the climate change, but it's necessary, because if we don't take measurements, there is, well, in the next century, 75% of the Netherlands will be underwater. So all kinds of measurements, not only the climate change, but also in the energy transition, is taken to prevent that the Dutch will be flooded by water. And I mean, not only rainfall, but the rising sea level, the rising river. So we have all kinds of problems within our country. And all these measurements are taken to prevent us from that the sea will take back our country.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that's a very, very good insight, and I think that's why also I was very keen, or we were very keen on having you speak on this panel, no? Because I mean, it's this situation in the Netherlands, but also like in other areas that are very prone to flooding potentially, and that have experienced water management, is so relevant to the discussion of how can you connect mitigation and adaptation. So it's always really seen as two sides of the same coin. So we're really glad to have you here. Perhaps staying on this topic of trade-offs, just very briefly. I mean, Evie, can I ask you from the Greek perspective? I mean, I just mentioned this example with increased use of air conditioning in hot periods, and obviously in Greece it's rather warm. Do we have experience with that? That trade-off between increased energy usage as a result of climate change adaptation?
Yes. In this example, I think it's really where we really see the trade-off. It's interesting how many years ago we were trying to promote the use of ceiling fans and promoting bioclimatic design. Now it seems that people really start to understand what it means to have a very hot urban microclimate. It's not just the heat waves, but it's a microclimate. So now it seems that we're reversing the way we see things. Now we understand the climate change. Now we have to adapt, and I agree. It's simpler for the average citizen to understand that we need to act. So now we have, for instance, when we have this trade-off, we need to have more air conditioning on the one hand to deal with extreme heat waves, and this causes more energy. But on the other hand, if we invest more in bioclimatic design, if we have more passive solutions, and if we have a better understanding of how we can deal with the long days of heat waves, that like the ones we've had for the first time, such long heat waves in Greece, we understand, we have the knowledge and the traditional way of utilizing our resources. For instance, if we have extreme consumption, we even have experienced blackouts, but we find ways, like people, like when traditionally we go to the seaside, when we have, and we still can do that in Greece. So it seems to be a trade-off, but in reality, we need to think about resources. And when we talk about resources, it's not just about understanding really what we need to do and how to alleviate the stress in the environment, but it's also about having better corporations, mobilizing more groups. So this climate crisis has forced us in a way to become more interactive, using more technology, using more applications, having more discussions with volunteers, with local, regional level, national level, and even this conflict really gives us the chance to understand better many things and maybe rethink a little bit our mitigation measures, because this is something that we have done for a very, very long time in a very, very slow way. And now it seems that we need to run. So it's we could say that it's an opportunity to rethink about how we are doing things and how we relate to each other, really. And I think the answer here once again is the local level, where people can really relate to each other, when people can have open discussions, and even through the conflicts and through the political tensions, things can be dealt with.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. I mean, that makes complete sense, and especially then on your last statement that now we have to sort of run. I think it's a good statement to make a transition to perhaps to the next two questions, which I'm rather tempted to combine them a little bit. I mean, so that we could zoom out a little bit so we can see both questions at the same time briefly. So we have this question of, like, to what extent do cities integrate climate change policy across departments? And at the same time, we've heard from Oliver before already the climate emergency and how that contributes to integrated action. So now I'm tempted to give the word actually to Oliver, and we're going to talk about these two questions at the same time. I mean, in your case, Oliver, you have declared a climate emergency. You have this integrated approach on cross-departmental cooperation. Perhaps you could expand a little bit on this, sort of the process, perhaps leading to creation of this interdepartmental sort of managing unit between departments, climate action group, and really reiterating perhaps again from your side the importance of cross-departmental cooperation within the face of climate emergency, and how that brings together adaptation and mitigation.
A lot of what Evie is saying is it strikes me as reflecting a lot of our experience, and particularly or at least our past experience maybe, particularly when Evie was describing how attention was taken off climate action because it had to be put on to responding to the climate emergency. And I think the most significant part of that integrated approach that we've taken is that consciousness that these aren't two separate things, that it is cause and effect. And so, the mitigation and the adaptation, one is the other, and the other is the other again. So, like in what I said earlier about there being a pushback against the mitigation effects and them being more difficult. At the same time, integrated within our adaptation elements are the mitigation. So as part of the public realm of proposed flood defences would be sustainable transport and would be biodiversity. So there is that level. But I think the most important thing is what Evie described, that when it comes to thinking about responding to the emergency, that we're not just thinking about adaptation, that we're also thinking about mitigation, and that recognition at a conscious level that the two are the same. I think that's the most important thing, that one doesn't get put aside while we concentrate only on responding.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I think it makes complete sense. And perhaps then handing over the word to Yannis briefly to comment on this. I mean, Yannis, you mentioned in your presentation already, both the mitigation, adaptation actions, and how City of Riga is looking at this from an integrated perspective also. One interesting question with regard to this topic that I always find is that the issue of funding streams. So, in a lot of cases, the funding streams for mitigation and adaptation might be sort of separate, depending on where they come from, I suppose. And the key challenge is to sort of avoid, as a result of that, sort of silo thinking. And this is something that is indeed observed in several cases, where mitigation and adaptation, simply because it's funded separately, is being approached in a sort of a silo manner. And what we now need to do with the climate emergency, everything, is to go beyond that and really think about an integrated approach. So perhaps, Yannis, from your perspective in Riga, what is your thought on this? I mean, how easy is it in your case to integrate these two streams? Perhaps reiterating again what you said in your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So from our side, I think it's very good that we have this commission related to the climate neutrality, and which oversees horizontally all these things, and not only mitigation but also adaptation measures. And I think it's very important that they are the key staff from all the departments, and also politicians, some of the politicians, decision makers, and this is how we can transfer this information all over the departments. But another thing, what we would like to do within this this plan is that when departments move their decisions to the city council, to the politicians, that they also evaluate the impact on the climate and all these things, because I think it's very important that, of course, deputies understand that, for example, this decision maybe is not so good to the climate issues, but it's another thing when it's written on the paper that it's evaluated, and that they, for example, take decision against the environment, for example, buy some fossil fuel boilers or something like this. And this is how we would like to integrate this across all the departments. But like I told, I think that it's very hard for us to integrate not only mitigation with the adaptation, but also within the adaptation all the responsibility sectors, because it's also is covered within different departments, at least in Riga and Latvia. And but that's why we try to solve this with this commission, which oversees everything. But as I heard that you mentioned also about this financing, and I think from the mitigation point of view, it's a little bit easier, because also there can be done a lot of things with different interesting financial instruments, like energy service companies, or also these prosumers or other things, and or car sharing, as I mentioned, that do not ask for huge investment, but that we repay this investment with the savings which we achieve within the measures. But from our side, it is much harder to finance adaptation measures, and this is where we are also struggling, and where we are dependent on the grants or some other structural funds, and that it's very hard to communicate the gains. Of course, now this year I think it was a perfect example where we could see heat waves, flooding, and everything within the Europe, and this is much more important now. But still, sometimes it's very hard to communicate what are the gains in an economical point of view, and it's not always there. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, very good points. Fully agree with that observation. Perhaps I can move briefly to Katerina also. I mean, we had your insight from your presentation already here, but perhaps do you have any thoughts immediately on what Evie, Oliver, and Janis said, but also perhaps from the German perspective on how you see this integrated approach being tackled in German municipalities? Or a general reflection on what the other colleagues said.
The framework conditions in Northern Westphalia, where we are working, are a bit tricky. And
Katerina, perhaps could you try to turn off your camera? We have some connection issues.
I hope it's better now.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I said that the framework conditions in Northern Westphalia for integrating mitigation and adaptation is they are a bit tricky, because these two topics belong to two ministries. They are separated into ministries, which makes it a bit difficult. What you just said about the funding streams, when you want to have a funding to integrate those two topics, so you have to think about, okay, what can I do? But I think I'm working in that topic with small municipalities for some years now. What I think is that there are activities to integrate the two topics effectively in so across the sectors, but I think this is a process that takes a long time. So what Oliver mentioned earlier, that climate mitigation requires some changes in behavior and structural changes. I think that this is the same for climate adaptation. I would say climate adaptation requires a huge change in governance structures, also with behavioral changes when it comes to citizens. I think it's I think it's very difficult. Yeah.
Perfect.
Sorry,
yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great, and indeed, you touched upon the importance of framework conditions, and funding. Indeed, that how it has a huge impact on how, in general, a sort of climate change mitigation adaptation planning can take place, and then it obviously also depends a little bit on the all the reporting and the implementation framework, and obviously the Covenant of Mayors might have a little bit of different approach than German, than the general often used integrated sort of reporting or integrated climate action planning in Germany. So even that has an impact. So I think very important that you mentioned the tricky framework conditions that might have an impact on how things can be integrated, but that there is indeed some examples of some smaller municipalities that are active here. So I think we can gradually come to a conclusion. I don't see any inputs in the chat specifically. Perhaps here quickly asking all of the panelists, do you have any additional remarks here to regarding what was said?
I have no questions about, but I want to make a statement.
Yes, please.
Yes, because we are aware of the need of adapting to the climate change, and the named programs are a result of intensive cooperation between different departments. This cooperation is not alone in the city of Rotterdam, but also with other cities in the Netherlands and in the rest of the world. But there's also the issue of money. We need 50 million euro to make the city climate neutral. And well, we have to persuade the politicians to give us that money. But you know, politicians and money, it's hard to convince them to give money for the measurements we take to adapt to the changing climate. So there's always a struggle. Every year we have to try to get more money for our programs, but we have really to discuss with the politicians to get that money. And sometimes it doesn't work, and we have to cancel some programs. So there's always a struggle. Can I get the money? And I think that's everywhere. In every city, there is also always a struggle for money to take action for the measurements on climate changing. So yeah, that's for us yeah, a problem, and I think for the other cities also.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. Indeed, that's a very strong point regarding the funding for both mitigation and adaptation. And I think this just reiterates the fact why it's so important to look for like synergies and cross benefits between mitigation and adaptation, so that, for instance, when you dig up a street to insert a modern district heating system, that at the same time you do something about the pavement, right? And you essentially keep costs down because you hit two birds with the same stone, and that's why
Yes.
Generally it's a very interesting argument to make for a good approach from a cost perspective. So I think having said that and having heard from all of you, thank you again very much.
Something?
Ivy, yes, please,
yes.
Go ahead.
I would like to say that from the experience in the Greek municipalities, it seems that joining the Covenant of Mayors and the CEP has helped a lot the internal cooperation in order to have a mitigation plan. It was bringing a lot of departments together, which was really, really a hard task. And now we do have this experience, and it seems it's easier at this municipal level to integrate this with adaptation measures. I would give the example of the technical services, for instance, or the green department or other departments. So it's quite easier to integrate now that we have some sort of experience with horizontal cooperation among departments. And I would say it's much, much easier than it is at the other levels. It's just that adaptation has a lot more links to the regional level and to the national strategies, at least in Greece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Evie, for reiterating again the importance of mitigation and adaptation at the same time. So I think that I'll hand over to Georgia to wrap up the discussion and to reflect on this. And Georgia, the floor is yours. You're muted, but no, you're still muted. I think that's the reason we can't hear you. No, you're not? Then it's just the system. Okay, no, then I will do this. That's the presentation both at the beginning of the session as well as during the interactive exercise that we did. See on the screen again, I mean, I think it's that we put notes down to the first more or less integrate to the second one really. I see that integrating mitigation adaptation for a holistic solution. And again, from a covenant domain perspective, I mean, we have
hardly hear you, Arthur.
You can also hardly hear me. Oh boy. Georgia, how's it for you? Still not? Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, it's better.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So where was I? So reiterating from a covenant of mayors perspective, I mean, this session has shown definitely why it's so important to integrate and think about an integrated approach to mitigation and adaptation within the framework of CCAPs. So I think it's very, both from a social perspective, both from a environmental perspective, but not last also from a cost perspective, why it makes sense to think about this in an integrated manner. I mean, this discussion between integrating mitigation and adaptation has been ongoing for a very long time already, and it has recently been reiterated and rekindled, with the focus on climate emergencies. And I think this is really, and even within the carbon deniers, I mean, many cities do acknowledge climate emergencies, and this is a very good opportunity to now continue stressing the fact that it's very important to look at these aspects from both angles, but really two sides of the same coin. We have very concrete examples, both regarding the governance, internal governance, and how that affects integration between mitigation and adaptation, but also from a technical perspective. We see that at the end of the day, the sooner these integrative potentials and trade-offs and synergies are being taken care of and are being considered, the more of a positive impact it has in terms of finance and in terms of climate planning in the long run. So this was our general rationale why we wanted to include this session within the greater EURESFO setting. I think, both from the covenant of mayors side, but also from the urban-led side, this was a very interesting session. Thank you very, very much for all the participants for joining us. Thank you very much to our speakers for a very insightful discussion, touching on both the overarching concepts, but also very technical examples, which are very useful here. The importance of taking into account the difference in enabling frameworks. Yes, again, we are very grateful. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much.